So hello everyone, welcome to Becoming a Clean Energy Superpower. So as Sarah said, I'm Suzanne Winkels, I am the Head of Programme for England's Economic Heartland, and as the Minister said, I really think that STBs have a really strong role in terms of shaping not only transport across the UK, but also a growing role in terms of increasing integration of transport strategies, but also about that future energy requirements of transport. I think we have a really key role in whether it's like the energy rollout of electric vehicles, charging networks, hydrogen, alternative fuel adoption. I know that us as an STB, we have done a lot on supporting Levi funding bids and Zebra funding bids. But we've also done a development of a lot of tools across the STB community in terms of supporting EV charging. As the Minister said, that collaborative approach, I think, is essential to delivering the transport network that is sustainable, resilient, and that we have in the face of evolving energy challenges. I've got a great panel here today, and I'm going to ask them some questions to highlight things. So on my panel, I've got James Golding-Graham, who is the Head of Decarbonisation and Innovation at England's Economic Heartland, so my colleague. I've got, hang on, I've just lost I've got Charlie Gilbert, who is from
Field Dynamics.
Field Dynamics, I've just lost the piece of paper with everything, and Simon Lusby from City Science. And I'm going to give you a quick few seconds to introduce yourselves. So, James.
It's just about morning, I think. So, good morning, everyone. Thanks for popping along to hear us have a chat today. As Suzanne said, I look at innovation, decarbonisation. Is that gone? I can talk loudly. Innovation, decarbonisation, and increasingly some of the analytical work that EEH does. It's a really interesting job, and I think getting more interesting all the time as we start to think about that kind of, I guess, holy trinity of energy and transport, and how we move that into the future to deliver decarbonised transport system.
Thanks, James. Hi there, everybody. Charlie Gilbert, I'm a partner at Field Dynamics. Field Dynamics is a net zero analytics consultancy. Our background and heritage is geospatial analysis, but we do a lot of work modelling EV infrastructure for local authorities, charge point operators, and feeding into business case investments for management for some of the private equity companies that we work with.
Hi, I'm Simon Lusby. I am the Managing Director at City Science. I'm a Chartered Sustainable Transport Planner, and City Science is all about getting insights to decision makers sooner on decarbonisation and what to do in what order to actually make a change towards decarbonisation within the transport and energy sector.
James, I'm going to start with you. So tell us about the Carbon Assessment Playbook tool. What does it do, and how can it support the government's missions?
So, yeah, thanks, Suzanne. I'm going to kind of talk about the CAP tool that we've developed. It's sort of adjacent to the question, to be honest with you, but I think it provides a really good opportunity to highlight the work that the STBs have collaboratively developed there, and the tools that we're producing that are giving local authorities better data and better tools to make decisions. Fundamentally, the CAP was developed in response to the Transport Decarbonisation Plan. In the Transport Decarbonisation Plan, there was a little line there that talked about the need for local authorities to start to quantify the impact of their policy choices that they were putting into their LTPs. So it was a bit of a step change from DFT to ask for that information. So we kind of got our heads together as STBs and thought, gosh, there's no unified or sensible way of doing that at the moment. So we built the CAP tool to kind of fulfill that gap, I guess, which was to really, really understand what the likely impact of a policy intervention was going to be in different types of place. And the reason I'm talking about that today is because, again, an outcome of that work is really to try and understand efficiency as much as anything else. So making the best use of the transport infrastructure that you've got, making the best use of the network that you've got. And to do that, you need to understand how things are moving around, where things are going to and from. And that's fundamentally what the CAP tool does. It comes in a few different parts. We have a carbon baseline, transport carbon baseline, which is developed from built up from the bottom up as it was. So taking local authority transport models and understanding the movements there. So it gives the local authorities the ability to look at the pinch points, the hotspots, where most carbon's coming from, where most energy is being used on their network to get people around from A to B. Then it sort of moves on to a slightly different part, which Simon has been, or his team has been quite directly involved with developing, which is a policy builder tool. And that really looks at, okay, if you put this policy into play in your locality, what does that do to emissions in there? And you can think, without too much of a leap, this gives you a pretty good idea of where energy is being used in your network and how energy is being consumed by the network and the people who are living in your areas. So from that baseline, as I said, we can slice dice, we can understand origin, destination, we can understand the hotspots, and that enables the local authority to prioritise interventions and where to focus their energy and efforts. The policy builder allows them to test those interventions, remembering that that's bespoke to place, and allows them to kind of prioritise those interventions with the biggest impact. And clearly what that does, if you're kind of wanting to think about reducing energy utilisation and using the energy that we have, the power that we have, in the most efficient way we can, we can really focus in on supporting active travel, shared transport, and all of these things really move the dial, because if we can avoid bringing more power, more more demand for electricity onto the network, then we don't need to generate as much in the first instance. It enables us to decarbonise other sections of our economy, parts of our economy rapidly and in a really kind of coherent way and in a well-planned way. It gives us better opportunities to support fleet electrification, which I won't go into too much because that's Ali's bag, but really links to thinking about transport, land use. And then the final thing on the cap tool is it's not fixed in aspic. It's something that we're going to continue to invest in. So we'll continue to update that carbon baseline, continue to understand what those impacts of those different interventions are going to be. And for me, that's a really, really important thing to do, so we can track the progress that local authorities are making, not marking their homework, but giving them the opportunity to reflect that back to DFT so we can speak with one voice what needs to happen in our regions. And it's a real kind of sweet spot for STBs to be playing in, I think, is to bring together those different impacts. As we see those local transport plans being adopted, we start to see the collective impact of those local transport plans on carbon, on energy use. And when we can talk about the likely demands of power in the future, and we can talk to DFT and different parts of government about making sure that we have the right power in the right place. I think I'll stop there.
Excellent. But you bring me on nicely to the question that I want to ask Simon, and that's, you've helped to use this tool and develop this tool. So how have you been trying to use this in terms of rolling that out with some of our local authorities?
Yeah. So just to start with, some of you might have missed the pun that James dropped in there, which was a leap, which is, he was meaning a large step, but actually local area energy planning, where we have acronyms, that's their acronym for energy planning, which is the other side of what our business does. And so that's where when we first set up City Science, or when Lawrence first set up City Science, it was all about the linkages between energy and transport and the tools and techniques missing in order to decarbonise that. So when we did our RTPI research to support that, some of you may have seen this, it often gets put up as a waterfall graph in a lot of people's presentations from every single other consultancy that does this. I appreciate that every time. Just keep the City Science logo on it, please. But what we've actually been using that for is with, for example, West North Hants, we were able to use it to evaluate different interventions that they were looking at to be able to see what interventions were going to be required when. And often, similarly, when we've done this with Cotswolds and with some of the London boroughs, the key thing is that everything is required in order to decarbonise. The trick isn't what is required and what isn't, it's what is required when and to what degree. And that's what we're going to be able to get into a bit today as well, is that, yes, electric vehicles are going to... Sorry, this is really hard for me to say. Cars are good. But yes, electric vehicles are going to be a key requirement of the solution. But firstly, we need to obviously address freight very quickly. But then in rural areas where people are going to be quite dependent on driving, we need to be thinking about how will you actually charge those vehicles, how will those vehicles be made available, and how much are they actually going to be used. So could there be pool vehicles that are actually available so that there's less fleet within that local area? And what are the other interventions that need to be pulled in order to link that in? So it's not just, do we need electric vehicles? Is that the box which we're addressing? It's actually within that electric vehicle solution, when are these being used? If every electric vehicle is charged overnight at the same time in a local area that has very low energy production, or is an area that is heavily reliant on solar because there are constraints on their grid, which I'll leave to the DNO elements. But if there are heavy constraints on the grid to actually get energy to that location in the evening, at night, and everyone plans to charge their vehicle at night, that's just not going to work. And so it's like if all of us tried to go through that door at the same time, that won't work. If we go through incrementally, it might. If we said, actually, we're going to share, and some people are going to go through the door at different times, then that works. Very weird analogy. But it's the same with electric vehicles. And that means that although there will be that shift to electric vehicles, we all know that we also need to be addressing congestion. We also need to be addressing parking, which is a space taken up. And so electric vehicles still needs to be considered in the same way that we would from a transport planning perspective of how do we reduce car usage, get people onto more sustainable, efficient, and reliable modes. But in doing so, still having that use of electric vehicles in that mix and what that role is. But now, rather than thinking about the emissions coming out of them, we need to be thinking about where are they being charged, at what times, by how much, how quickly, where, and how you're linking that for people who might not have a connection at home.
That leads me quite nicely on to the question that I've got for Charlie, and that is, I know that you've been talking about how we're going to have provisioning for transport electrification and how difficult that's going to be, and you've been developing tools to help support that, so maybe carry on from
Yeah, no, absolutely, thank you. So I think I'll just pick up perhaps one comment on rural, which I think is a real challenge, and looking at addressing rural areas is we did a project which was really interesting in Devon County Council, and we were looking at rural communities and whether they're on or off street. And there's so much groupthink and myth-busting, and that's why data's so important to help demystify some of that. Because when we actually did the analysis, we measure all 28 million households, whether there's space to park, 0, 1, or 2+ cars on a driveway. Yes, I really am that sad. And what that tells us is 32.7% of households are on street. So take that number, and then if you distill that down into some rural communities, there are still rural communities that are 60, 70% on the street. So to Simon's great point, how are you going to service those communities through whatever transport mode? We do a lot of work with DNOs, and I think the conversation there has definitely moved on. There is much better communication through the involvement of DSOs to interface into local authorities to really help unpack some of the local schemes that are being developed, and having that sort of top-down meets bottom-up type approach. And one of the observations that I've had there is we did a lot of work with DFES modelling, so distributed future energy scenarios, which is a kind of 2050, 2040 kind of view out. And 5 years ago, it was very much a one-way conversation, and the plans were being communicated out and everybody was listening. Now it's becoming much more two-way, and I think DNOs are really waking up to having the right kind of tools and data to help oil the wheels in that conversation. And we've worked on a project called ChargePoint Navigator, which is a project we've done with UK Power Networks, 130 odd local authorities, and it's really helped them to plan their Levi funding for on-street charging infrastructure and into deployment as well. And that's meant that we can start to match supply and demand, and we can bring in connectable cabling data and other data sets to really help understand, to James's point, where those hotspots and gaps are, and that's really helping. I'm going to finish off with an analogy in terms of what I see EV and that kind of marketplace, because we play in lots of different vectors. And I think it's a surfing analogy to jump on the analogy bandwagon that Simon sort of started off. And I think there's a series of waves. There's been an excitement wave, there's been a planning wave, there's been a procurement wave that I think we're in now. We do a lot of work with charge point operators, and there's tenders coming out left, right, and centre, and sometimes they're struggling to cope with the demand of those tenders. And we're then going to go into a deployment wave. And that deployment wave has to be sustainable for all parties. For network operators, it might be great that we're planning 1,000 charge points here and 3,000 there, but what they really need to understand are what are the first 100 or 200 that you're going to roll out, because then they can focus and drill down and support with the connections and making sure those really happen and drive adoption through. And if we get the waves right, we'll surf them well and we'll have a good day surfing. If we get the waves are too big, we'll get flattened. If the waves aren't big enough, interest will wane and we'll start to see people get frustrated. So I hope that just gives you a bit of a view.
I've got one key thing, because I'm going to be told that we're over time, and that is, what is the one key takeaway that you think STBs can do to support this? Quick fire.
Okay, very, very quickly. We've got the regional energy strategic plans coming through. So this is the NESO conversation. So NESO, National Energy System Operator, that's been brought back into public ownership by government out of National Grid.
Yes.
Thank you. The STBs definitely need a seat at that table, I think, is so we can represent the needs of transport to enable that transition to happen smoothly and in a coherent way with all of our local partners, because partnership working at local authority level is challenging, and we have a lot of experience we can share with them to make that happen well.
Fab. Have you got a quick takeaway that takes 60 seconds?
For me, it's a consistent lexicon. I think that particularly on the energy side, having that standard set of terms that we can all relate to, all understand what they are. We've done a lot of work pushing out our messaging in terms of on and off street data and demand. We've done work with MOT and demand, and now we're getting some consistent numbers that people are starting to get behind. And I think socializing those out and making them available is really, really important.
Fab. Simon.
The two biggest things for both EV deployment and for local area energy planning are engagement and modelling. And if we don't do these, if the STBs can get involved in those local area energy planning to provide those stakeholders to actually engage with, and also to support that energy modelling at a regional level, that would bring those two elements together in a more meaningful way so that the modelling doesn't then have to be done at a repeat location and the stakeholders don't need to be brought in again and again through different means.
Thanks. So thank you, James. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Euan.
Thank you, Susan.
Thanks, chap.
Excellent morning, everyone. So, yeah, I'm Sharon from Transport East. I head up the Regional Rural Mobility Centre of Excellence. So this morning we have Tom Mace from Transport for the North, who's a social researcher, Melanie Watson, who's an independent public transport consultant, Emily Macdonald from Intelligen, who is the Chief Operating Officer, and Professor Stephen Joseph from the Smart Mobility Unit at the University of Hertfordshire. We are going to be talking about collaboration and innovation, and really how this is helping to overcome barriers being experienced in rural areas, and how some of the data and insight that's currently being generated is helping to accelerate solutions for these communities. Tom, we'll go first with you. Transport for the North has been doing a huge amount of really positive work around your transport-related social exclusion model. Could you just perhaps give a quick introduction to people who don't know about it, and then also just some experience of the feedback that you've been getting from the wider stakeholders in transport, and then also perhaps, how some of your local authorities or your partners might be using some of this?
Yeah, so transport-related social exclusion, or TRSE for short, is essentially when a transport system or a transport network isn't working for local people. That could be because it's unreliable, that could be because it's just inadequate, it's outdated, or it could even be things that because it's too costly. We've done a lot of work on this. As Sharon mentioned, we've created a tool, we've done lots of primary research through a very thorough and extensive research agenda at TFN, and the reception so far has been relatively extremely positive, to be honest. It's kind of led the way in terms of the thought around transport-related social exclusion. So personally, in my 2 years at being at TFN, I've really seen the transformation of people knowing what TRSE is. When I first joined, people might not know anything about it, or if they did, it was kind of seen as some sort of like abstract social issue, maybe an academic term. But it clearly isn't. Through our work, we found that it's affecting millions across England, including the north of England. And we're starting to see people really understand what TRSE is. And again, that's through our research agenda. So that's a really positive thing. Our work is being applied to lots of different organisations, including local authorities across the north, but different audiences too. As an aim of our STB, we are the experts for our local authorities. We provide that much needed strategic value to advance our call for better transport in the north. And we're seeing our work be used just to do that just by our partners. And it's going beyond the north as well. We see lots of different STBs, lots of different authorities and other organisations want to use our work, reference our work, and understand how we created it as well. It's kind of one of a kind as well, the tool. As well, my colleagues and I, we often talk to people outside of transport, including public health and education, because obviously there's lots of cross topics that we can work on there. So it just is another reminder of how important transport is and how far-reaching it is across all aspects of life. In addition to this, it's frequently used by academics and queried by other researchers outside of maybe local governments, again in the north, but also nationally and even internationally as well. I can't take too much credit for that because it's very much a team effort, but it just reinforces the innovation that we're doing and how far-reaching it's become. And I also think that's important because the north is home to some really great world-class universities as well. A lot of them specialise in transport, have transport-specific degrees, master's degrees, apprenticeships. And we have a really good relationship with a lot of universities who give us their advice, their input, their expertise. And I think that's important for the wider industry as well, for people coming after us to advance better transport. In terms of our local partners, though, they're using our tool through lots of different ways and in ways that you might expect through things like local transport plans. But at TFN, we have something called the TFN Offer, which is essentially a service that local partners use to it could be something as simple as requesting a data set, requesting report and research, or it could be more bespoke assistance to what they are doing. And the TRSE tool is very much a part of that. So as I said, we help with local transport plans with our TRSE data that kind of shows areas that are doing worse, areas that are doing better. It helps other work such as corridor studies as well is a recent example. We also help the department as well with our TRSE data. And I think in its purest form, the TRSE tool, our primary research, all our tools really, are essentially revealing what's happening day to day, what often might be missed and not even considered by other transport planners or other areas of transport.
Excellent. Lovely. That's great. Thank you. I find it really incredibly interesting and insightful. Melanie, if we move on to you. You've been working recently with Transport for Cornwall on a lot of their work and in their bus strategy. What sort of insight have you gained really from that work and your wider work in public transport on the key strategies, governance arrangements that will provide the best opportunities to deliver outcomes for rural transport, in particular public transport?
Right, thank you and good morning everyone. Yes, hopefully you've heard of the Transport for Cornwall partnership. Cornwall has got a lot of rural challenges and when I worked there we did a huge amount of work to really transform public transport across the whole of Cornwall. And that was very much done through really strong, bold leadership. Basically, Cornwall would not accept, it was going to manage decline. It wanted to challenge the status quo of where we were, particularly in regards to public transport and the provision of commercial services across Cornwall. So it very much challenged that status quo, delivered a full partnership, took bold decisions around funding. So there was huge investment has gone into Cornwall, both from a capital perspective, but more importantly from a revenue perspective. So the council really put a healthy budget together and was bold, literally made sure that that budget was protected and pumped into the provision of 50% of the bus services across Cornwall. So, and they are delivering growth. They bounced back from COVID far quicker than anywhere else, and they were delivering 13% patronage growth. So it is a good news story for a deeply rural authority that was prepared to, break down barriers and challenge that status quo. Today, I'm here representing Peninsula Transport, the subnational transport body for the region, and we're looking to take that good work of Cornwall and try and roll that out further across the peninsula. So we're developing a better bus programme, and it's very much around how the peninsula, the Peninsula Transport, the STB, can look across the region and pick out the pockets of best practice. There's lots Cornwall have done, but our other local authority partners are also doing some great work building on their BSIPs. So we're taking the different pockets of best practice and really looking at how do we get everybody up to the same standards. And we're looking across the board at all the different elements, the service provision, the information provision, the ticketing, the pricing, all those elements that make a good public transport bus journey. So the peninsula, because we sit above local authorities in terms of, the governance structure and everything, it's easier for us to take that bigger picture strategic view and support them with some of the more trickier issues. And a key example is interoperability. So Cornwall delivered that with the two large operators and the smaller operators, but the other partners haven't managed to do that. So we're now going to support them in terms of learning the lessons of what Cornwall did, and let's get interoperability across the board around the peninsula to really simplify the customer offer for buses and to really encourage that modal shift. So that's really our challenge, and that's really where we want to go. So really, in terms of lessons learned and everything, and what the peninsula are now doing, it's speaking with one voice across the region. It's bringing partners together, both our local authority partners, but also the large bus operators. We're looking at bringing rail into the mix as well, because again, Cornwall have done some fantastic work with rail. We want to see more of that across the region. So it's bringing all those partners together and delivering that added value. That's what the Peninsula Transport is about. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Melanie. Move on to Emily. So very couple of quick lines to say that in the DFT Future of Transport Rural Strategy that was published a couple of years ago, there was an allocation of £3 million to deliver some rural innovation. £2 million went to the Connected Places Catapult. There are 8 pilots happening across England and beyond, because we've got some colleagues from Scotland here. And so Emily is one of the pilots that's taking part in this piece of work. Emily, my question to you, just explain to us, how you got involved in the pilots, and also kind of the value of that to you as an SME working in mobility.
Thank you. Yeah, so, you were the person who introduced us to our partners. So it all started just over a year ago. There was an online consortium building event where there were hundreds of people on it, actually. It was SMEs and local authorities. And we were having the opportunity as SMEs to kind of pitch our idea. And in our case, we are designing and manufacturing charging stations for light electric vehicles, so e-bikes, but also accessible mobility scooters, e-scooters, anything of that sort of micro mobility world, really. So we went on that. I sort of gave a very brief kind of explanation. Our USP is our infrastructure is all solar powered, off grid, perfect for the rural environment where you need a light footprint. You want something that's going to be, you're not going to have all those expensive costs about, laying loads of cables and all of that infrastructure that's needed to go with these things. And Sharon was on the call as well. And we were talking to a few different potential partners, and Sharon got in touch and said, do you know who would be perfect? It would be the Broads Authority in Norfolk and Suffolk. It's such a particular kind of environment there, if you know that kind of neck of the woods. It's the biodiversity is really sensitive. They have huge tourist numbers over the summer, mostly coming either in cars or obviously boats to use the Broads. And the landscape is suffering, and the locals are struggling as well because they don't always have access to their own green spaces. The sort of economic equality is sometimes a bit of an issue there as well. And they've got some beautiful, beautiful places that, they want to enable people to get to, but they're really trying to explore that behaviour change of you don't have to use a car. And actually, it's often better not to, not just for the roads and for the environment, but also for your well-being and your health. And so that's where we came in. And so Sharon was fantastic, introduced us to Harry Mack, who is our contact at the Broads Authority. And we've gone through a year-long process of refining. We've got various models of our charging stations, but the one that we really wanted to develop through this project was the lockable offer. So we call it the Power Pod. It's got a solar panel on the roof. It's got a lockable digital lock feature. And it's been fantastic, really. We not only did it allow us to really refine the design of it and improve it, I think, significantly. We're using recycled plastic wood composite material that is 90% recycled, so it's really great. It helped us improve the design of it as well. We were planning on needing concrete pads underneath, and actually through talking to the Broads Authority and their planning experts, that's not appropriate for those environments. We're trying to reduce carbon, not just through the emissions of the journeys, but the product itself and the actual immediate infrastructure and in immediate place. So it's been a fantastic process in terms of us improving the design, but also where you came in fantastically is every time we've spoken throughout the project on and off, you're so well connected, and actually, you can plonk in some great infrastructure, and that's great. And I think that is a big part of it, to have somewhere where you can have the great cycle lanes. But what do you do when you get there? And especially if you're on an e-bike in a new area, or you don't know where you can charge up, all of that's vital. But it's really about the behaviour change, and it's about the engagement. And you're so well connected, and you're so knowledgeable about the area. We're based in Northumberland, and although we've visited and we know the Broads area a little bit, we're in the north. That's our neck of the woods. And so having the sort of like the contact point of Sharon, who says, "Oh, actually, have you spoken to these guys? There's a social prescribing program that's really successful in the region, and that's actually allowing local people to have access to e-bikes." They might not be able to afford normally, and it's giving them that option to commute, it's giving them option to use it to get to their own green spaces, and it ties in perfectly. And so we have not only developed our product, we've not only sort of established, and they're about to go in actually in the next couple of weeks, a proper network across 3 sites in the region of zero carbon active travel infrastructure for people who are living there and visiting as well. But it's also really helped us to learn loads about how to engage people in the local area, what's really going to make a difference. And the other key thing that we've done is we're about to launch our Juniper website as well. Partly because people need to access these things, need to get into them, and we don't want to rely on whether the visitor centre is open at that point when they turn up and taking up the time of the local business to have a key. So we've turned it so that it's all digital, so people can scan the QR code, get into it all through our website, which is great for them. But it's going to provide data, and that's the really critical thing that we're really excited about, that we're going to learn much more about just how many people are using our infrastructure, a little bit more about the journeys they're taking and whether it's replacing car journeys as well. But it will also capture exactly how much solar is used. So for people's carbon reporting, it's interesting. And we've had that input through our partners at the Broads Authority for that digital side of it, as well as the physical infrastructure too. So it's just been brilliant. And as a result, we've got another network going in the northeast that's expanding in other tourist locations, and we're talking to people all over the country. And it's been called the Rural Accelerator, and it certainly has done that for us, and you've been a critical part of that. So thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Stephen, we've got 2 minutes. Sorry.
It's fine. It's all right.
Sarah's there. So we've been working with you on the Rural Networking Partnership, and also the roundtables that you've been delivering on behalf of Transport East. Some insights into that from an academic perspective, please.
Well, the University of Hertfordshire, which among other things runs its own bus company, and I have to say that because right this minute they're launching the first electric vehicles in Hertfordshire, just been launched this morning, and we've discovered that there's very little academic work on rural transport, so we've tried to fill that gap. The roundtables have helped with that because we've found lots of people doing things. And I think one key message from this is simply that rural transport can be something other than big diesel SUVs driving everywhere, which is what, if you read social media, you'd think that's what it is. So we found lots of alternatives, Cornwall work that's been mentioned, car clubs, mobility hubs that are being developed by England's Economic Heartland and others, travel plans for workplaces, tourism options, lots of work on tourism, Broad's part of that. And there are challenges, but we've also found good practice on housing and planning, places like New Lubbersthorpe in Leicestershire. And there are opportunities, and I think the other message really is there are opportunities going forward. Rail and bus reform, we're doing a lot of work, as we've just been discussing, on what bus franchising might look like in rural areas. More on tourism and leisure opportunities. We're about to do a roundtable on public-private partnerships. I think we might have invited you to that, Emily. And of course, with the integrated transport strategy. So I think that the summary, given the time, is that there's lots going on. One of the things the roundtables have shown, and the work with Sharon and Transport East have shown, is there's actually a lot of work going on alternatives to single occupancy diesel car use in rural areas, and something that I think Melanie's been saying is about making best practice the norm across rural areas, and what the roundtables are about, and the wider partnership is about helping other people in rural areas know what's possible.
Okay, thank you. I think we've not got time for our last question, which I'm sure the panel will be happy with. But thank you all very much for coming along and joining us this morning.
Right, I'm James White. I'm technical lead for the Western Gateway Subnational Transport Body, and I'm joined this morning by, on my immediate left, Hattie James, Transport Officer from the Western Gateway, Jonathan Walker from Logistics UK, and Euan Wilson from Peninsula Transport.
Morning, everyone.
Right, our theme is about kickstarting economic growth, but we're going to really focus on freight this morning. Hopefully, lots of you were here yesterday morning, where we had Julian Worth, who talked about the importance of freight far better than I think I can do it. But Julian made the really key point around the fact that we are all customers of freight and logistics. Freight and logistics underpins everything really that goes on. And he made the point about with the National Planning Policy Framework housing forecast, those sort of 1.5 million new homes to be built. Freight and logistics has that key part to play in that. And he quoted the example of all the thousands and thousands of tons of aggregates that are going to be needed to build all those new homes. And we, in the West Country, we have some vast aggregate quarries down in the Mendip. So we are going to be very much part of all of that. And when it comes to freight, and we, as the two STBs, Peninsula and Western Gateway, we've been working together on a joint Southwest freight strategy we adopted a few years ago. We started off with something like 79 possible interventions, and then it came down to 46, was it? I can't remember now. 46. But we wanted to be proactive. We wanted to work with the freight industry. We wanted to understand what their priorities, what their needs were. And it has been a steep learning curve, and it continues to be a steep learning curve. But one of the interventions that came out of that freight strategy was undertaking a backloading pilot scheme. And I'm going to ask Euan just to give us a little bit of a summary of that whole project which we've been funding. Euan.
Thanks very much, James. So as part of the Southwest Freight Strategy that we developed back in 2019, one of the key interventions was to undertake a pilot scheme to offer free membership to SMEs and small business hauliers to join a backloading trial. So you may have heard of a company called Transport Exchange Group. They already provide a backloading website sort of platform. So the technology is not new. We're not teaching the freight industry to suck eggs, but small businesses were not taking part in this. So we thought it would be a good use of our activity to provide free membership for that. So it's a very small scale pilot. But 33% of freight journeys within the Southwest are empty running HGVs. It's massively inefficient, and we've done a lot of engagement with the Logistics UK. I'm very pleased to see Jonathan joining us today, and to understand the actual challenges faced by operators themselves. Within the Southwest, particularly in the Peninsula, the area that I represent, the strategic road network is significantly less developed than the rest of the country, compared to an example like the Midlands. So Freight is much more challenging. There are no freight terminals in the far southwest for rail. So this was a really good opportunity of STBs adding a little bit of value and actually getting involved with the private sector, because I think as public sector transport planners, that's something that we've been historically very poor at. Julian Worth yesterday spoke very eloquently, as James said, mentioned that the freight market is almost entirely private sector driven. And as public sector planners, we very rarely engage with that sector. So this was a really good opportunity to actually try and make a bit of a difference. So the membership, the take-up has been reasonably small, so the numbers are not huge. But one of the learnings has been that it's very difficult, and it doesn't always work, and I think that's a useful bit of learning in itself. So thanks, James.
Thanks, Euan. I think it's a good opportunity now to bring in Jonathan from Logistics UK, and just put you on the spot a bit, Jonathan. What do you think are the biggest transports and logistic challenges currently facing the UK, and particularly for us and in the southwest region as a whole?
Yep, Joe, really good to be here and really good to have this conversation, and I'll try and do justice to what Julian said. I'll work very closely with him. As you said, logistics underpins everything that we do, yet often is just considered as a sector in its own right, without its sort of underpinning foundational qualities for the rest of the economy, for public services, pretty much every aspect of our daily lives. In terms of challenges, I think they're fairly self-evident. It's an industry that operates on very small margins, and those are margins that are felt in our pockets, as to my previous comment. So logistics increases its prices, we all feel it, the industry faces a backlash. So the capacity of the industry to absorb some of the cost increases that we've seen in recent years has been very, very difficult, whether that's fuel, raw materials, labour. The industry feels it very strongly. But it is also an industry that is, you might not see it if you're on the motorways every day, but it's an industry that is at the forefront of innovation. Looking at things like connected and autonomous vehicles, at decarbonisation, but all of those things come with a cost as well. And it's striking that balance between, ensuring supermarket shelves are full versus trying to do the right thing. And I often say, COVID might feel like a distant memory for some, but it really isn't. And we only tend to notice logistics when it goes wrong, not when it goes right. It is a modern miracle to walk into a Tesco or a Sainsbury's and see the shelves full when you think about where that stuff has come from. Very quickly on the southwest, I think it's all of those things I've just said, but more so. And often that's because of the distances involved. I live in Northumberland as well, so I recognise some of these challenges in terms of kind of remote communities. It's the distances involved, it's the lack of critical mass. And I think all too often we see solutions posited about logistics which actually come through a London lens in particular, and that's great. Some brilliant things being done, brilliant things being tried in terms of last mile logistics in and around London, but they're very London specific and they don't work in other places. So it's really good to hear the conversations about engagement with the operators about what will work, and trying things and being prepared for the fact that they might not, but that you learn from those.
Yep. Thank you, Jonathan. I think that whole point about costs and doing the right thing and decarbonisation was sort of part of the thinking behind the backloading trial and the carbon benefits that would be from that. But I did mention right at the beginning, it's been a very steep learning curve for all of us. So I'm just going to ask Euan first of all about what lessons have we learned from that backloading trial, and how can it be applied to future freight initiatives that we might want to do?
Well, as I alluded to earlier, I think we did a really bit of useful engagement. We presented the backloading trial to the membership of Logistics UK Southwest a couple of months ago. And the feedback we got was, that's very commendable, but it ain't going to work, and it's really difficult. And they also said, please don't call it a backloading trial, because within the industry, that's a bit of a dirty word. It's a low-value bit of business, and it's not what they really seek to get the benefit of. And we didn't know any of these basic facts before we undertook the freight strategy. And it probably, in hindsight, would have been good if we'd done a bit more engagement with actual freight operators about some of these interventions, because it has had some success. But Transport Exchange Group have found a lot of independent small operators are a little bit suspicious of being offered something for free. And one of the big takeaways is that it's just very, very difficult. And the more rural the area, the harder it gets for the reasons that Jonathan's already mentioned. And it's all of the issues faced by the rest of the country times 10 really. And yeah, I mean, fine margins you mentioned. freight operators are economic decision makers. If it's a little bit more expensive to do a road, they just won't do it. And I don't think the public sector really understand the decision-making process behind a lot of their activity.
Yep. Thanks. Yeah. Jonathan, can I bring you back in on that and what other advice you might have for us as STBs in that respect?
Yeah, I think it's first and foremost, obviously engage with organisations like ourselves, particularly for those kind of high-level initial discussions. But as Euan said, there's nothing better than getting that engagement directly from the operators, who, I get it as well. They pay my wages. Will tell you in no uncertain terms what will and won't work. But I think also understanding the broader pressures that those operators are under. We know, for example, on reducing carbon emissions, huge appetite across the industry, both because it's the right thing to do, but also because of pressure they receive through their supply chains in terms of their end customers demanding that of them. But it's a very difficult thing to do when you've got to keep making those deliveries on a daily basis. So I think my advice would be go out, talk, get to know your freight operator community, and if you don't know who they are, come and talk to us.
Yep. Thanks, Jonathan. And that actually just brings us onto the wider issue about working more effectively with the freight industry and how to address those key freight challenges. And we've been doing quite a bit of work on freight forums, and I'm going to ask Hattie to say a bit about how we have been trying to engage more frequently and more often with our freight partners. Hattie.
Yeah, thanks, James. So as we sort of mentioned, it became very clear very quickly that there is a lack of conversation and engagement between the public and private sector around freight. So one of the key things that came out of our freight strategy was to set up the South West Freight Forums. These have been running for a couple of years now, and they tend to occur sort of quarterly. They are well attended. We have between sort of 30 to 40 people on average. That's from local authorities, from the private sector, from airports, from ports, from sort of train operators as well. We tend to get guest speakers in to sort of give a bit of a background about what they're up to, but it's also the opportunity for discussion and for people to sort of get to know each other. One thing that we've been sort of starting the last few months as well is specific for our local authorities. So we've been running what we're calling freight awareness sessions, because as we're aware that people have heard about freight, but they don't really in the public sector know how to help, how to sort of get about getting involved in that. So we appointed WSP to sort of do some freight awareness sessions. It doesn't exclude sort of other people outside of transport as well. So we're getting the planners involved, we're getting the sort of comms people involved as well to sort of learn a bit more about how they can help the freight sector for their areas. We have also run sessions with our elected members and councillors as well, because obviously to sort of get a bit about why they should be thinking about it. And as we look forward, we're sort of going to continue running these forums, and we're going to sort of engage more with Logistics UK and think about how we can sort of do it the other way around as well, help the private sector understand why public sector make the decisions they do, and try and sort of link it up a bit better in that sense.
Yep. Thanks, Hattie. And this is joint work that we're doing with Peninsula and ourselves. And I think, you mentioned about we went to a Logistics UK Southwest event a couple of months ago. We did our presentation and then we stayed on, and it was quite an eye-opener, really, hearing about what we take as transport planners to be very, very, very sensible things like 20-mile-an-hour zones, clean air zones, low traffic neighbourhoods or livable traffic neighbourhoods, whatever you want to call them. But actually hearing from the freight operators what the impact of these measures was quite eye-opening, I felt. Jonathan, have you got any other advice you might want to give us as Logistics UK to how we can continue to engage with yourselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think just picking up on that point there, I'm really, really cautious about the logistics and freight industry being the big bad wolf and being, and being opposed naturally to those things. Reflecting on something like, reduced speed limits. Actually, the industry agrees. They are people. They live in these neighbourhoods. They understand what is trying to be achieved. I think it's when decisions are made that don't seem like they've thought through what the impact will be on freight, and that's not just about the impact on them and their drivers getting stuck. It's actually in their ability to service the wider economy. And if you were to consider something like planning, we've been heavily engaged in work around the revised MPPF. we've been calling for a greater consideration of freight logistics in the same way you'd consider something like utilities. You know, when you were looking at sort of earmarking big new developments, you would think about how you're going to get power and water to them. How much thought is being given to how are they going to get the vital goods and services that will help those communities actually be more sustainable and potentially have a knock-on impact on wider transport considerations. And that can only be done by sitting down with a group of operators and saying, well, how would you service this? I think, again, that would be my advice is you know, don't be afraid. Don't think the logistics industry is going to come in and say, just build a motorway everywhere and we'll be fine.
Yep.
Actually, they do want to engage and come up with sensible solutions.
Yeah, thank you, John. That's a very, very positive approach to be taken. And Julian yesterday flagged up two key issues around the whole aspect of deliveries and helping operators to do those local deliveries, but also that wider planning framework side. And as Hattie said, you know, we've been pulling in our land use town and country planners as well to help them get an understanding of freight. I mean, as Julian put it, you know, it's blindingly obvious about freight, but it's so obvious that it tends to get ignored. Right. Okay. One final question. How can, this is for all three of you, how can government policy better support sustainable and efficient freight movements? I mean, we want to work actively as STBs, but where can government play a role? I'll go back to you initially, Jonathan. Don't mind.
I'll try and take this very, very quickly then, and I could reel off our entire manifesto, but I won't. But from my world, I lead a lot of our work on infrastructure. I think it's about not thinking in a siloed mode. It's actually at a national government level, understanding what the key freight corridors are across the UK, what are we moving and where does it need to go from and to, and then trying to solve the problems after that. All too often we rush as a country to what are our roads going to do? What are our railways going to do? Rather than thinking what's the best and most optimal way to move these goods in a sort of mode agnostic approach, which by and large will still be majorly road. All freight journeys will involve road pretty much to some extent, but let's not leap to that straight away. So it's about getting that really high level understanding, which previous government committed to, and we're hoping this government will as well.
Yeah, thank you. Euan and Hattie, do you want to come in on this?
Thanks, James. I think kind of obvious one from yesterday was we were talking about the integrated national transport strategy, and there's a massive opportunity to ensure that freight is not just considered but is really integrated into that strategy and not just an add-on, which it probably has been historically. The change in NPPF is very welcome, and I was speaking to, I think it was Andrew from RHA, they've supported that, you guys have supported that, and that's very welcome. But having a really clear steer from government about the need to incorporate freight into spatial planning is really, really important. And planners are quite often preoccupied with securing contributions for healthcare or for education, and there isn't really a massive consideration for the needs of freight. I think that really needs to be integrated into the transport planning and local planning process. And I think integrated transport strategy is a big opportunity for thinking about freight a bit more.
It is indeed. Hattie, do you want to? I think I've got about a minute or so left. So
I think the whole purpose of this is just reinforcing the fact that we need to talk to each other, whether that's with the private sector, public sector, that's across the STBs. It's not even just in England, it's thinking further afield. What are people learning? What are the lessons learned? Like, how can we sort of share things, experience, to sort of make sure that we're all achieving the right goals?
Yep. Thank you. So really, I was going to have a quick summary, but there's no real need because I think everyone's done that. But just to leave you with those thoughts about continue to engage with the freight industry, that issue about getting freight into spatial planning, that point about the integrated national transport strategy. Freight is now very much in there, and in the very early gestation periods, it perhaps wasn't there, but we've lobbied hard to make sure freight is part of that. So I hope that's given you an insight into what we're doing as STBs on freight and from the freight industry itself, from Logistics UK, what they need. And I'd just like to say thank you to the panel, thank you to Jess and Jonathan and Euan, and thank you all for listening.
Thanks.
But my first question is going to be, introduce yourselves. I'll go from one side to the other. I want to know quickly, please, what has your organisation achieved in the past year that you are most proud of? So we'll start right at the end over there. Introduce yourself and tell us what you're proud of.
Thanks, Sarah. My name's Alan Creedy. I look after, I'm the lead officer for Western Gateway, Subnational Transport Body. So that's a north-south body, sort of between Gloucester and Dorset, and authorities between the two. We've done a lot. We're fairly new to the party, but we've increased our influence in resource and, as I say, influence. I think despite being small and lean, what we've managed to do within the space of a year is to prepare a strategic transport plan and a strategic infrastructure plan. In the past, those things have taken much longer, but we've managed to turn that round in a year, and what I think that does, it keeps it tight, it keeps it focused, and more able to be updated as we move on.
Hi everyone, I'm Andrew Summers. I'm Chief Executive of Transport East Subnational Transport Body. I think what I'm really proud of is the team have really delivered on those areas that our partners really care about. And there's a number of things in our strategy, but building on the theme from earlier on, I'm just going to take one example, which is rural transport. So 1 in 3 people live in the east in rural areas. It really is an issue that all of our councillors and local authorities care deeply about. What we've done as a subnational transport body, and congratulations to the team and our wider partners and other STBs working together on this, is created a centre of excellence for rural mobility. We've done a number of pieces of work that align to our role as a subnational transport body to develop strategy, advise government on priorities and support capacity and capability. We've done a huge amount of research. For example, we've researched recently 1,000 young people to understand why in rural areas they really struggle to access services, education and training. And that work that we're doing is now delivering tangible outcomes. So we heard earlier on from Emily about one project in the East that this work has led to. We have 3 other projects delivering funding in the East right now from that Rural Accelerator Fund. And we know from the Minister, so Simon Lightwood, who we heard from earlier and came to our summit last month, said that work is really having an impact on shaping ministerial thinking on rural transport. And we were invited last week to present to the Transport Select Committee on our evidence to really advise them on how they can inform government policies going forward. So the work that our partners want us to do, we're delivering on, and it's having tangible impacts in terms of delivery, which is really important to change economy, society and carbon emissions in the East.
Thank you. Nigel.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nigel Blackler. I'm the lead officer for Peninsular Transport. And over the last 12 months, like our colleagues, we have developed and got approved a transport strategy representing the whole of the peninsula. And next week, we will get our board to sign off the investment priorities for infrastructure needs within our area, which will then be submitted to government. But I think the key achievements in terms of looking at the impact on transport services, as you've heard earlier this morning in the presentations, the work that we're doing now to extend the model that Cornwall has for buses right across the peninsula, to take that from a system that serves 500,000 people to 3 million people. And if we're successful in doing that and achieve the same level of growth in bus patronage that you've seen in Cornwall, then that would mean an extra 6 million journeys on our bus network every year in our area. Now, we've got support now from the 5 local authorities, the major bus operators. So this is an STB which is actually looking and working across boundaries, adding capacity to our local authorities and actually bringing forward delivery. And one other point, if I may, is the other area we've been focusing on and put a lot of work in this year and now seem to be making some progress is on HS2, which you'll say, well, that doesn't come anywhere near the peninsula. But the construction of the major interchange, Old Oak Common, is going to have a huge impact on our intercity services into and out of Paddington. So we've been working with the rail industry to understand what those impacts are, how they can be mitigated, and how we can turn HS2 and potentially the difficulties that's going to cause for us over the next 7 years while that interchange is built into beneficial impacts, and therefore extend the benefits of HS2 into an area where physically it's not being provided, but our rail users will see some benefits actually resulting from the HS2 project. Thank you.
Maria.
Well, segue from HS2 into the Midlands, absolutely, not really, really important. Hi, I'm Maria Machankoses, I'm the Chief Exec at Midlands Connect, and I thought I'll summarize 4 programs of technical importance that have really made a difference. Don't worry, it's not going to be half an hour, Sarah. And one politically, which is also very important. So the 4 areas that particularly last year we have accelerated as pace is actually securing the consensus amongst members and mayors on our east-west connectivity priorities. So that's Midlands Rail Hub, which secured 123 million last year take it to full business case, and also continue to make the case for investment on the corridors that are linking to free ports in the area, like the A5500, for instance. We've done actually collaboration with local authorities to secure 40 million worth of EV infrastructure through the largest consortium of local authorities across the country. This is about showing how STBs don't want to lead, we just facilitate, convene, and put forward a strategic case for why coming together at that scale can make delivery of infrastructure much more impactful and give certainty to private sector. And finally, we've done a lot of work on ticketing with the West Midlands Combined Authority, who's driving, is leading very much in this space with the Swift card, talking to the new authority in the West Midlands too, making sure that actually those east-west connections are not hindered by having to use two different types of ticketing every time we go up there. Our work on economy and freight, really important too, and Jason is here, making sure that freight is talked to through the lenses of economy as well. So a lot of work in there. And finally, a lot of people have been asking me about politically, where do we sit? Well, Midlands Connect Partnership, the two mayors have agreed that in terms of collaboration, we are the best platform for that conversation to happen. So something that we're very proud that we celebrated last year too.
Thank you. Sarah.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sarah Valentine. I'm Head of Analysis and Appraisal for Transport for the South East. Apologies if you're expecting Rupert, but you've got me instead. I think for us as an STB, it's been very much a year of sort of consolidation of our work. One of the things we're particularly proud of is our Centre of Excellence platform. That was launched in June last year. It's an online platform that really builds our local authorities' capability and capacity and provides sort of real tangible benefits, helping them to deliver the schemes that obviously we've identified across the region. Particularly proud to say that it's been recognised by DFT for its collaborative approach and also the innovation that it's been bringing as well. We've got over 200 of our local authority officers signed up to it. There are a range of case studies, good practice, various resources, webinars, data and tools that are available for those local authorities to really increase their resources available to them. I think the other thing is really pleased that we're looking to work with the DFT on how our platform can be used to share some of the analytical advice that the DFT analytical team want to get out to local authorities. The other big piece of work for us this year has been around our transport strategy refresh. We did our first transport strategy in 2000. Obviously, time has moved on. A lot of things have happened since then, and we felt it was the right time to refresh that strategy and make sure it remains relevant. We've really built on the evidence base that we've had over the last 5 years. We're in a very different place as an STB than we were back 5 years ago. And we've had a big focus on the strategy, making sure we've got clear missions and that it becomes much more outcome focused. A key part of that has been adopting a co-creation approach. We've undertaken significant engagement as we've developed that strategy, particularly with the sort of socially excluded groups. There was a lot of comment on our first strategy that maybe we hadn't engaged as much as we could, so we've had a big focus on that. And I know my comms and engagement team will absolutely shoot me if I don't remind you all the consultation is open until Friday, so please do respond.
Thank you. James.
Thank you, Sarah. So my name is James Golding-Graham. I look after decarbonisation, innovation and the analytical functions of EEH. Again, similarly to Sarah, I'm depping for Naomi today. There's a couple of things that I wanted to talk about just briefly. I touched on the development of the carbon analysis playbook, which EEH have been, I'd say, project managing and shepherding for the last couple of years with lots and lots of collaboration and input from our sister STBs. Really proud that that's now been launched fully and is now available for free to all local authorities in England. And I think that's a really good thing for us to be talking about, that cross-STB collaboration that's gone into that and the close work that we've done with DFT to make sure that they're comfortable with the tools that we're providing our local authorities. So it's a big gap that's been filled there. So just to touch on that one. Similarly to Sarah, I've got some absolutes that I need to talk about today, one being East-West Rail. So big scheme going on in our part of the world. We're really excited to be supporting the legacy impacts of East-West Rail and working very closely with DFT and EWR to make sure that the collaboration is happening at the local level and our local authorities are fully integrated and kind of engaged with East-West Rail as that scheme comes forward. It's going to be properly transformative to our part of the world. And I'm going to borrow a phrase that Martin used to use on it. It was a paradigm shift, which is a huge opportunity for us to change the way that transport's delivered in the region. And it isn't just for EH. You know, it's worth noting, and this isn't me boasting, I promise you, I've had nothing to do with most of this, but we're ranked first for economic growth, job growth, population growth, export intensity, foreign direct investment, concentration of R&D jobs, patent filings, all of that good stuff, which kind of really contributes to tax take. And we continue to make sure that that scheme really delivers, not just for our region, but for everyone else as well.
Okay, thank you. And EEH are taking credit for all of this?
No, well, Adam will say yes.
So, Martin.
Hello, everybody. I'm Martin Tugwell. I'm Chief Executive of Transport for the North. In terms of what's the one or two things I would... You've already heard from my colleague Tom about the genuinely groundbreaking work on transport-related social exclusion. If I remember rightly, Tom, the recent update, we've now gone down to the granularity of output areas across the entire country. So we did it for the North, but actually, hey, we put the data sets in and we've done it for the whole of the country at output area level. That's the level of granularity. We're amongst sort of friends and colleagues, and many involved in technical stuff. So let me give you a few numbers. 150 requests from our partners to use the TFN offer to access the data, the tools, the capabilities, the framework. 150 requests, of which we've been able to service 120. We have saved the public sector, as a consequence, well over £500,000, and actually retained the knowledge and experience from those uses of that data and those data sets within the public sector to be earned, shared and beyond. And that foundation that underpins the work we do around data, frameworks, capabilities, etc., then leads us into the work we're now doing around what we're calling a Northern Appraisal Playbook, which is being taken to our board in 10 days' time, and looking at how we use the insight around social and environmental information that we hold within the Regional Data Observatory to actually take advantage of the flexibility that already exists within the Green Book. So if we know, as we do in the North, that every pound invested, and it's an investment, not a subsidy, every pound invested in the railway services of Northern delivers £4.50, £4.80 wider social and environmental benefits. Why aren't we putting that equation into the assessment of future investment? And why aren't we then taking advantage of the fact that the investment in transport is enabling young people to get access to education, is enabling elderly and ageing population maintain their independence, which if they maintain their independence actually gives them a better quality of life, a happier life, which reduces health costs, which reduces social costs. So there is some really fundamental changes in the way we are looking at and appraising investment, driven by the TFN offer and then enabled by the Northern Appraisal Playbook.
Okay, thank you. Now, I'm hoping you're starting to think of some questions, because we will have a short amount of time for questions. While you're doing that, I've heard a lot from you all about data and tools. Is this the way STBs are changing? Do you think the role of STBs will change with further devolution, with a new government? Is that something you see happening already, and what are we going to do about it? Who's going to go first? Andrew's looking at me. So.
Yeah, happy to kick off on that. So I guess that is one facet of what we do, but we need to play to our strengths. And others have mentioned, we work at scale cross-boundary. We provide economies of scale. We are that collective voice across our regions, and that's what our partners in DFT fund us to do. I guess a really good example of where we can do that going forwards is really driving forward things such as rail partnerships. So in the wider South East, we've created the wider South East Rail Partnership in response to the creation of Great British Railways. What this does is brings together Transport East, England's economic heartland, Transport the South East, Transport for London as, I guess, those custodians of the local authority voice in one place, and brought together Great British Railways, Network Rail, GBR and others to have that one place where strategic rail matters across the wider South East are discussed and the priorities are agreed and articulated, therefore, to the Secretary of State. And that wouldn't have happened without the STBs really driving it. And what we see that now as a framework for rail governance for local authorities in the wider South East going forward. So as mayors come on board, they can join that framework as they come on to ensure that there is that genuinely collective voice and partnership going forward. So it's a really unique role that only those regional bodies could play because they operate at the scale to create that system.
Okay, thank you. Maria?
Yes, one of the areas that we are particularly investing heavily, and it's a new work stream that we hope to accelerate next year, is the area of network resilience. There's a lot of data that our local authorities and indeed our national agencies are asking to bring together. So local authorities are working tirelessly through the local plans on flooding issues, flooding areas, housing, where to put future housing, but they also got the local knowledge of what happens when events like roadworks or digging for utilities. So all of that data just sits there. And in terms of planning and how you prepare for future events and future activities, it doesn't seem to be shared in a digital platform with the likes of environmental agency or actually Network Rail and National Highways. You would think, but it doesn't quite happen in the same platform. So that's an area that it would become really helpful for everybody and cross-sector, not just transport sector. And that's an area that we are really investing hugely. So we got an initial platform for all of that data to start be sharing, and we hope moving forward it will help and become really helpful to everybody, not just Midlands Connect.
Martin, I am going to come to you, but I'm going to add a bit onto the question as well. With all this, and because you were talking about appraisal, how do we sort of align this with the government's carbon targets as well? So we're changing our tack in the way we do things.
You want quick fire? So look, I was going to answer your question. James, I've bored you in the past about this. In terms of why do you come back to a subnational, a regional level, this is my third incarnation. The reason why you do it is there are certain things which cross boundaries where you need to work together. There are certain things where doing it once rather than doing it 19 times makes sense. I'll go back to my comment about the TfN offer. And there are times when coming together, as Andrew's touched on, about having an amplifying voice in Westminster. Those three golden rules, if you like, still apply to me. So whether it's looking at freight and logistics, taking goods and services from ports into the hinterland, whether it's about scrutinising, as the TfN board do, the performance of rail operators in the north and overseeing the development of investment, or whether it's some of this thought leadership, which is actually where we do have a unique space. I think the key for me, Sarah, is actually saying there are those three kind of functions. The agenda is set very much by the members that sit around the board, and I think that will be different, and we do see it different across all the STBs. Personally, I don't think you can answer the question about carbon without talking about social inclusion and without talking about the economy. It's not one over all of the other two. It's actually how do you unlock. So the narrative for the North is, I know you had 80 odd billion in your headline figure, in the 118 billion pounds a year in the North if you unlock the economy of the North. 118 a year. But by the way, we've got 3 million people across the North who at this moment, right here, right now, feel very excluded from society because either they don't have access to transport or they don't have the ability to pay for transport. So yes, it's important with the evolution of spatial development strategies. As somebody who worked on regional spatial strategies in the past, that's a great thing. Great to have that focus that SDS brings. But if we can't find solutions for those people today, if growth doesn't mean how do we enable personal growth for those 3 million people, we don't earn the right to be able to look to and plan for the future. And if you get those people contributing in their communities, then you will get the ability to regenerate, and then you will start to see a way how you square the circle between the economy, society, and the environment.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Adam, do we have any questions from the audience? If not, I have more, it's fine. I can't see any, no? Everyone's being very polite. Okay, right. So, what is, in terms of short-term wins, what is the one thing you think could be done immediately to bolster that sort of economic growth that we know is one of the missions? So, let's go with James.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm just going to say the word bus over and over again here, I think.
That's fine. We like quick answers.
I think really big plaudits to the government for pushing the money that they have into supporting the development of BSIPs, but we need more of it. We need better integration in terms of bus data, better integration in terms of bus planning, because, and I'm going to nick one of Suzanne's phrases here. She was at a conference, my colleague Suzanne, at a conference last week where she came back with the idea that cars move people and buses move society, right? Which I thought was a lovely little kind of nutshell there, and it's building on the back of what Martin said there. We need to be enabling access. So those really low-hanging fruit stuff is about enabling people to access sustainable transport choices. So active travel, sustainable travel, and shared travel modes. So more buses, please.
More buses. Sarah?
Thank you. Yeah, I think one of the big challenges that everyone faces, we're all sat here and we've all got very, very good transport strategies and they're all very good words. But we actually need to deliver that. We know that we don't deliver, we rely on our partners, our local authorities, and we know across the country that they are in very, very challenging times, both from the funding and the resources to be able to do things. So for us, I think it's a real focus on our centre of excellence and providing as much capability, capacity enhancement as we can to help them deliver, whether that's access to analytical tools, access to funding to actually do that early stage scheme development work, that really make a difference in accelerating delivery of all the schemes that we advocate for.
Nigel?
Thanks, Sarah. Within the peninsula, one of the things which we're working on at the moment at a very practical level is we have a rail network which is a main line and many branch lines in 84 stations covering our area, serving 3 million people. And the thing that we're working on at the moment with the rail industry and the 5 local authorities is to introduce a rail card which would allow local people to use the rail network for commuting journeys, for access to education and health, and introduce a simplified product. None of the time barriers that you normally get with these products, a very simple product that we were looking to roll out in September of this year, which will make a huge difference to the use of the rail network by local people in our area. And there is capacity on the network, so we're looking to fill that up. So there's no extra cost in terms of services, but it's about filling those empty seats and making rail more accessible for local people, more affordable for local people, because we're in an area where we don't have high incomes. But the STB has led this initiative, brought the local authorities on board with that, and working with the rail industry and the Department for Transport to roll that out later this year. And we see it as one of the very practical things that we're working on to benefit the residents in our area. Thank you.
And Alan?
I think one of the things that we can do, Sarah, is help local authorities and mayoral authorities, for that matter, to plan for extended levels of growth. That's something which has landed with us fairly quickly. It's still being digested, but we've got the tools and the expertise to do that at scale. It's a major challenge for partners, but that's something that I think is going to occupy us for some time.
Okay, and actually that one quite nicely leads on to my next question, is that you've all told me what you're most proud of in the last year. What are you going to achieve in the next year? What would you like to do to help achieve some of these government missions and help the government deliver these missions? I'm trying to think. Maria, let's go with you first for this one.
Well, you could actually repeat some of those answers again, because the issue around helping local authorities is becoming quite important for the STBs at the moment, because we all want things to happen. And this other element and another role of STBs is about that one voice, or collective voice, as we now say, isn't it? And decisions, government needs to really make decisions, and there's tough times out there at the moment. But we all know that what our local authorities and our businesses need is certainty. So one of the things that we will be doing, when you consider the forthcoming 10-year infrastructure strategy, there's the announcements around RIS 3, local major road networks, all of these things really matter to unlock growth. And some of those schemes are really ready, yet they're being paused. Decisions have been paused for all sorts of reasons. So I think it's going to be really important for STBs to make sure that the message about what those infrastructure programs that have been worked on so hard for the last 6-7 years really actually cross the line and unlock all that growth that we all want to happen as soon as possible.
So encourage government...
Attention, please. Mr. Sands, please go to reception. Attention, please. Mr. Sands, please go to reception.
Do we have a Mr. Sands? So essentially what you're saying is you need to encourage government to make quicker decisions to actually push some of these things over the line.
Very important.
Okay, does anyone else have an answer on this? Martin?
So 3 things. First of all, we'll continue to work with National Highways to make sure that they start on site with construction of the A66 improvement, a £1 billion improvement in east-west connectivity across the north of the north. We'll continue to work with Network Rail and partners to make sure that the next stage of the £11 billion investment in Trans-Pennine route upgrade continues. But just to kind of put that into context, why that's important, for the next 5 years, there will be over half of the days in each year, there will be some form of blockade at some point on the TRU, on the Transpennine route, because we have to rebuild around an operational railway. Managing that and maintaining credibility and keeping support will be important. And the third thing, I very much hope we get the next stage of the business case for a new station at Bradford across the line. If it's good enough for King's Cross and St Pancras to have a new station acting as a regeneration for a city, if it's good enough for Curzon Street, boy, is it good enough for Bradford, the 5th youngest city in the country and city of culture for this year. We've got to start making some differences on the ground.
So again, it's getting these things over the line. It's making these things actually happen. Andrew?
Yeah, I was going to add to that, maximising the opportunities from devolution and legislation. So in our region in particular, really interesting situation where all of our local authorities will be going through devolution. In 2 or 3 years' time, they won't exist as they stand at the minute. We'll have 2 mayoral authorities. We'll have a new set of unitary authorities. And the role, therefore, of the Subnational Transport Body as a constant through that process is really going to be valued by those partners and government as well. So what we're doing over the next year is really working on a devolution partner programme. Our aim here is, with our partners, ensure we have that laser focus on the economy, on the environment and society, and ensuring transport supports that through what is going to be a very transitional and disruptive period. And then the end state of devolution provides a system whereby those mayoral authorities, the Subnational Transport Body, government and the unitaries are all part of a system that don't duplicate each other, but genuinely work together to deliver those outcomes that we describe. And I think the role of the STB here is becoming really evident. The work we've done with our partners shows that there is going to be that role at that subnational level to bring those mayors together, bring those unitaries together, particularly around strategic connectivity. So, for example, rail and freight and strategic roads, but also supporting our local authorities with capacity and capability. Whereas Martin says, we don't want them all to be doing the same thing multiple times. There's a real role for the expertise and capacity that we've built up over the last 4 or 5 years to really underpin some of the arrangements for those authorities going forward. So a really strong role in devolution, I think, is what we're going to be working on over the next 12 months.
And I think you're right, and that goes across the country as well. It's not just in what each individual STB, because something that might work for rural transport in Cornwall is probably going to work pretty well in Lincolnshire as well, or in Herefordshire or in Cumbria. So apologies for any areas I've missed out. So you've either all been stunned into silence or they all terrify you, one of the two. So I'm going to one final question for you all. We'll start with Martin and go that way. We talked quite a lot yesterday, and then we had Simon today talking about the Integrated National Transport Strategy. What is the one thing you would like to see included within it? Martin.
So this is a personal view. I'd like the word strategy changed to system. Because as transport planners, we do like a strategy, don't we? We've got plenty of them. I was looking up before this about what the definition of a system is. A system is things working together as part of a complex whole. And that's actually what we've got to do. The INTS has to be a mind shift, because the fundamentals of how much money is available aren't really going to change. The barriers and the challenges in terms of how what we can do in terms of investing in alternatives, we kind of know. It's a mind shift. It's about understanding that when we say transport is a derived demand, we start tackling some of those demands that actually shape travel and talk about regenerating communities. We talk about bringing people into social inclusion. We understand that a transport investment is actually a down payment on economic success in the future and savings in things like social and healthcare. That's the fundamental. It's a system, it's a complex problem, and I think that for me is about the INTS. It's a mind shift. That is as much about how we go about things. Change the algorithm, you change the outcomes.
James.
That's quite a thing to follow.
You can just say buses if you want to, if that makes you happy.
So that's sort of what he said, but I think just again that reiteration about people, making sure that people at the centre of all this. And I think it's a hell of a lot to ask of the INTS, but if the INTS can be shifted to thinking about a people-first approach that can then cascade through the rest of government. So, and this again, personal view here, so please don't shoot me or tell me off. Instead of investing in Heathrow, we should be investing in tram systems and MRT systems in small towns and cities that
Okay,
support
thank you.
people.
So we've got systems, trams, Sarah?
Integration.
Integration.
We need to move away from the modal sort of silos of funding, decision making, and into a sort of much more holistic, multimodal approach that focuses on people and places.
So working across different departments even. Maria?
That was my word, but never mind. No, seriously, I think I'm going to be a bit challenging. We also need to make sure that it does take the whole nation behind a vision. I mean, at the moment, we're all acknowledging the importance of local and places, but if the whole country doesn't say this is how we're going to go about transport, and these are the drivers for influencing future policies on transport and how it links with other types of sectors, we've got a real problem. We have a very broken system, and that's when the integration will not happen. So I generally think the word national should not be underestimated, as much as I love the Midlands. But it really does need to drive the whole nation towards an integrated approach to the way we plan, and it is about the system.
Integrated national system. Okay.
National.
And buses. Nigel?
Thank you. I think it needs to identify who is going to be responsible for ensuring it's delivered and how it's going to be monitored.
Accountability.
Exactly.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Andrew?
I think the phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast really applies on this one.
Okay.
We have to change the DNA of how the system works, like Martin says. You can do it, though, but this needs some teeth. Where it's worked really well, for example, is Transport for London. When the mayor came in, Sadiq Khan, with his Healthy Streets approach, they had to change the whole DNA of the organisation, embed it, break down silos, attack portfolios, funding, design standards, corporate scorecards. Everything has to be addressed. So someone to really drive that forward with teeth.
So accountability and essentially the power to do it. Okay. And final, Alan, you have the final word.
No. Strange times, isn't it, in terms of policy? What was popular and essential last week is now less so. I think carbon is the thing that we need to watch out for, and I think it's part of our job to make sure that that isn't lost in this current discussion.
Excellent. So we've got social issues, economic issues, carbon issues, making sure it's got teeth, making sure it's got accountability, making sure it's a system, buses. And so all these things, and working across departments and integrated. So all these things we would like to see come out of this paper. I won't even say the word strategy. There you go. So thank you ever so much for joining us today. Thank you ever so much for all of our STB representatives here on the stage. Give them a round of applause. Thank you.